Thank you, Celine. Good morning, everybody. I'm John Shenholzer. I'm the Advocacy Director for American Veterans for Kratom Safe. I'm also a person in long-term recovery from substance use disorders. I've been clean and sober over 43 years. I'm also the co-founder of the McShin Foundation in Virginia, a national leader in peer recovery support providers. And, I spent a lifetime really in recovery. But it's just so important we learn about kratom, and this is why you're in for a heck of a treat today, because I got some great trainers on here with me to really explain this plant to you and the difference between this plant and the value of this plant, and the difference between the adulterated products and the chemical products that are pretty much 99% of the headache we have in America with kratom. But to cut it short, I'd say about 12, 14 years ago over at McShin, we were noticing kids coming through our organization. We have sober living and recovery center and stuff like that. So we did a lot of drug testing, and we noticed some kids taking kratom. And I asked them, well, why do you take this stuff? They said, John, it helps me stay off of opiates. It's a replacement medication for pharmaceuticals that have terrible side effects. It helps me with my PTSD, my anxiety, and it just answers all over the map. But one thing I noticed specifically was you couldn't tell they were on anything. If it wasn't for the fact of our confirmation drug testing, and kratom drug testing has been around for a long time, especially with the confirmation testing companies, and we wouldn't have known. And, we had a policy against kratom use based on what the FDA, the DEA, and Mayo Clinic was saying about it. They all, pretty much said it's bad, stay away from it, drug of concern. Well, fortunately for me, I got hooked up with a processor person in the Richmond community. He's actually one of the old timers in importing and processing and distributing kratom products. So I was able to get in front of him, to learn more about it. But the truth is, I was going over to his office to bust some heads to ask him, why are you selling this stuff in the vape stores next to the bath salts? It can't be good. Well, that began my education. And I paid attention. I'm an open-minded person. If we have something that's valuable to help people get off of opiates, I want to know about it. And you got to remember, this is before, the Suboxone blow up, before Medicaid expansion nationwide. Because back then, Suboxone was very expensive. And McShin, we pioneered buprenorphine in 2004 in our abstinence-based recovery center, using it as a 5-day step down and then, pursue an abstinent-based lifestyle. Well, 10 years ago, we did a survey, and what that looked like was that we took 30 addicts. It was over a 6-month period. We engaged them in the streets of Richmond and said, look, would you be interested in coming into sober living for a week, no charge, and we'll give you access to Kratom to see if that's a good tool to help you detox from opiate. And back then it was primarily oxys and heroin, a little bit of fentanyl back then. And over a 6-month period, 29 out of 30 people took us up on that offer, and they spent a week in sober living using kratom, and they successfully detoxed. Pretty much it wasn't as good as Suboxone, but most of them said it worked almost as good. One guy, he ran off. He had a pocket full of money and a stripper girlfriend, and he didn't see no reason for recovery, so he took off. But that told me that there's something valuable about this plant. Shortly thereafter, Virginia expanded Medicaid and the Suboxone blew up. So now nobody has a read, it seems like, a reason to seek this out. But anyways, fast forward. A couple years ago when I retired from McShin, I participated in the John Hopkins human clinical trials. I'm 67. I got terrible chronic pain, too many to list off. I can't even pronounce the names of the conditions I got. So I took a small amount of kratom for 9 months, and I'm thinking, damn, this stuff, it's cheap, it works, it's better than Tylenol and pharmaceuticals. I didn't have any, desire to ruin my life, smoke pot, drink liquor, drop acid. I didn't have any side effects. I didn't get high because, I realize you got to take X amount to get high. So I know if you keep a rational serving, you'll get the reason you take it for. Well, part of the survey was to go cold turkey overnight. I did. I had what I would call zero detox symptoms other than the first night, I didn't sleep well. The second night, I slept a little bit. By the third night, my sleep was fully restored. And I had a wonderful bowel movement for about a week, which was a plus for me at my age. So I really appreciated that part. So I went several months. I wasn't obsessed with using it. And, I determined I could be an occasional consumer for my pain. And I am today. And, but what that did was, I got to learn more about this. Why is it demonized? Why is it stigmatized? And then I found out, well, that's because of all the adulterated products, the out of control marketplace. These manufacturers are trying to outdo another manufacturer, making a stronger extract, putting chemicals in it. And, 708 hit the streets a couple years ago, and the industry is a mess. I was recruited to run the advocacy side of the American veterans because they realized back in, the 2000s, these returning veterans they weren't getting very good service from the VA, and tens of thousands of them found the plant product, the natural kratom product, and that's what I'm advocating for: natural kratom products, not adulterated chemical products, and it solved their issues. And during my journey, I ran into the chronic pain population in America back in, I think it was 2014, 15, when they closed down all the pain clinics nationwide. There was a lot of drug seeking, get high seeking at these pain clinics, but yet a third of that population was legitimate pain patients that were cut off from their pain medication, and they found kratom. And you're going to hear from, Laura and Heidi about that. They fit that category. And I just think it's a shame that America can't find, appropriate regulations for the natural kratom products and deal with the dangerous, illegal, adulterated chemical products. And then I'll cap it off with this. The last couple of years, as I do travel the country advocating for appropriate regulation, because regulations solve all of our problems, I feel like. I noticed coast to coast, our nation has what I call get high stores. They're vape stores and tobacco shops. Call them what you want, but they're loaded with just an endless supply of dangerous chemicals. And the natural leaf kratom product is blended in there, and they're getting caught up in a demonization, a stigma that they don't deserve. So that's why I'm here, and I'm going to turn it over to Laura, and she's going to run us through the PowerPoint, and I guess at the end we'll do question and answers. And I'm just excited to be part of this. And Laura, you can take it away from here. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, John. So before we get started, I'm just going to give you like 2 minutes to fill out this little pre-evaluation here. This really helps us to be able to, judge how well we've done. And, if we answer the questions, maybe how much you knew before and how much you know after. So I'm just going to kind of stop for about 2 minutes and then let you fill that out. You just raise your hand when someone's finished, and then I'll know when when we can move on.
If you need more than 2 minutes, this may not
Yeah, like
record.
I said, I don't know. I can't tell you how long it's going to take. So,
Post-evaluation takes a little bit longer than the pre-evaluation. We should have a little, never mind, I was going to be unnecessarily funny there.
You mean like the Jeopardy theme song?
Well, I
yeah.
was gonna have, maybe the current, political scene or something,
Oh
Hey,
gosh,
Mr.
don't do
Washington,
that.
this just happened.
Well, we got our first person done. That's good.
Remind me back in school when you took your test, when time was up, you raised your hand. I was always the last one.
All right, we'll get like one more minute and then we'll get started.
Yeah, pre-evaluation pretty quick.
Yeah, so I think we'll get going because it does look like you can finish up if you're still going. So while we talk about the objectives today. So again, John covered it really well. And let me just quickly introduce myself a little bit in further. I'll let you know my story, but my name is Laura Romney. I'm actually from Utah, so just north of Salt Lake City. And I am an 8-year Kratom consumer. I am now the president of International Plant and Herbal Alliance, which is a nonprofit that really focuses on education and teaching about kratom and herbal medicines so that populations can learn about that and get a scientific background about what plant medicine really is. And so I'm excited to be here today. And Heidi will introduce herself in a minute when she gets to her science part. So we'll kind of again, the objectives today are we're hoping that you understand in general what kratom is. A lot of people, you probably know a little bit what it is, but a lot of people just have never heard about it. Also realizing, what is their scientific evidence? And is there, of course, there's safety and there's risk with anything that a person consumes. We're going to identify what 7-OH is and what the synthetic products are that are hitting the market, that have hit the market the last 2 years and how they're impacting consumers and the market. We're going to talk about analyze addiction potential and kratom as a harm reduction tool. John did a wonderful job of introducing that particular topic. And then at the end, we were going to talk about government policies and how both the federal government and state and local governments are in a battle to try to figure out how to regulate kratom and the synthetic 7-OH or synthetic products. And so I'm hoping that you will learn a lot today. So first of all, what is kratom? So kratom is actually a tree that is indigenous to Southeast Asia. Excuse me. It's been around for thousands of years. It's traditionally used for pain relief and for energy because what typically happens is the workers in the fields, of course, back there, they don't have a lot of traditional medicines. They get sore and they get tired. And so they'll actually just pluck the leaf from the tree and actually chew the leaf right off the tree, or they will go home and they'll dry it and brew it into an actual tea concoction. It's a member of the coffee family, so it's got a lot of the same characteristics, including that little bit of an energy boost and a kick. Kratom tree is actually quite large. If you see pictures of it, it's a very tall tree. It's not a slow growing plant like a cannabis type of a plant is. So it's actually not the flower that you're consuming. You're actually consuming the actual leaf. You will see strains of red, green, and white. A lot of it has to do with marketing, but there is often a hue variation between the different strains. As you can see here, this would be a red, this would be a green, and this would be a white. It all depends, the color depends on the time of the year when it was harvested, how old the leaf was, and different drying procedures that determines the different characteristics of the different strains. It's nothing, you do see individual names, sort of like in the cannabis industry, they'll come up with catchy little names, but the reality of it is you're looking at a leaf with different stages of drying. It's often put into capsules. It is a very leafy, truly tasting. It's not really pleasant. A lot of people doctor the plant up I put mine in like water with a little bit of water flavoring. Some people mix them with orange juice just to try to hide that flavor a little bit because it is not appealing. But others like to put it in capsule format. The other form that is used is an extract, and that is they actually take pure kratom leaves and they process them into a full spectrum little extract bottle. And so that's another way that people take it. But of course, that's a lot more powerful and much smaller quantities that you will intake. So Kratom is really truly nature's symphony orchestra. It's such an incredibly beautiful plant because it has so many effects. It helps with pain, it helps with anxiety, it helps with mood. It sort of has a little bit of a pain medicine, dopamine. It's a feel good plant really. It has over 40 different alkaloids, and the most common abundant in the plant is the mitragynine. There is also a 7-hydroxymitragynine alkaloid that is we call it 7-OH for short, and it's actually found in trace amounts in the plant. Most typically it's less than 2%, but even then it's less than 1 in most cases. Uh, Kratom is really interesting because depending on your dose, you get a different effect. If you are taking low doses, you actually can get a little bit of an energy kick, but higher doses can actually cause a little bit more sedation and actually, give a lot more of that pain relief. It's very, very different feeling than like a traditional, even an opioid or even cannabis that can cause that little bit of a buzzy high. It's a different, especially in lower doses, you just don't feel that heady feeling that you do in a lot of those other, type substances. Most importantly, though, kratom is a partial opiate agonist. It is not a full opioid. And so, unlike, full agonists like oxycodone, fentanyl, and heroin. And so it partially connects into those receptors, and that's how it still helps with pain and has some of those benefits, but it does not have the risks like respiratory depression that some of the other full opiate agonists have. John, he always does an amazing job of describing this slide, so I'm going to let him cover this one. You're muted.
Yeah, thank you. I was actually answering the question. Y'all gonna get this PowerPoint the full deck. But this I was so happy to see this come out because this verified that survey we did back in 2016. This is why people use it. This is, you know, 61% of consumers are women in this particular survey. 40 years was the average age. 84% college educated. This says a lot about the population that consumes these products, but 91% was for pain relief, 67% anxiety, 64% depression, that 41% opioid dependence. Why that's so critical is that after a year, 35% of these people that used kratom to pivot from one pill kills were still opiate free a year later, and they used kratom as their what do you call it, their replacement therapy. And this is the part that irritates addiction doctors and the FDA. And that's why, I'm convinced that, you know, the FDA, they have a bias against plant medicine. Like there's no room for plant medicine in America, where we know that up until 150 years ago, all the medicine in the world was basically plant medicine. So America's got to find a way to value and respect plant medicine, regulate it, and not demonize it so much. So, but 87% of the people consume kratom, they really had no problems with it. So, and I think that's a hit. And it does have a 3% addiction profile. Now you think about that. Alcohol has what, an 18% addiction profile? Opiates has a double-digit addiction profile. Cannabis has a double-digit addiction profile. Kratom has a 3% addiction profile. And I'm thinking of all the harmful substances you can be addicted to, Kratom is probably the best one should you find yourself addicted to it. And what I've known historically in my, day-to-day living, in my real life experience, I've only seen 3 natural kratom leaf product addicts in all the years I've been in this space. Now, I'm not saying there aren't more, but only 3 ain't bad. Now, I have seen a lot of people get addicted to the shots, the adulterated products, and the chemical products. But that just isn't the natural kratom leaf product. So this is why we need a lot of education in this area and prevention work. Thank you, Laura.
Hey, no problem. So there's a lot of truth and fallacies in kratom in particular. And we're going to go through some of these in more as we go through, but we wanted to put these in here just because there's two slides we won't go into in detail here, but it would be definitely good to loop back afterwards after you've heard the whole presentation to go back and see if you now understand the difference between the truth and the fiction in what is understood. One real one I want to highlight is we hear this over and over again that there is no science behind kratom, and that is absolutely false. There is over 450 scientific studies, peer-reviewed studies that have been published about kratom. And in fact, in February, John, Heidi, and I will be attending a symposium in Florida, where we spend the entire week with scientists reviewing all of the up and coming science that's happening. So this is not something that is just a willy-nilly product that's out there. It's definitely has a lot of science behind it. A couple of things here that I want to point out. Again, you can read this later, but one thing we typically see in a lot of media is that it's smoked or injected. This is absolutely false. Unless someone has come up with a crazy way to do it, that is not how it's consumed. It's really only consumed orally by powder or capsule or in that liquid tincture form. The other thing is you will constantly hear people calling it a drug, and they will call it an opioid. And again, that is absolutely not the case. It is a dietary botanical supplement. And as we explained in the other slide, it is not a full opioid. It is a partial opiate agonist. So it is in absolute terms, not an actual opioid. We will go through 7-OH in just a few minutes. The other thing we will talk about, and Heidi will really cover this, is the fact that there's a lot of misinformation about the actual science and some of the quote side effects that are reported of kratom causing. So she will cover that a little bit later. So in a pain and mental health perspective, this is where I'll tell you a little bit about my story. So actually, this is a picture of me. I had a little bit shorter hair then, but I am a 8-year consumer. I have a condition called trigeminal neuralgia. It's a facial nerve disease, and I have got chronic debilitating facial nerve pain that is on the top half of my face. It actually starts, I'm a very rare case actually. Usually people have it in their jaws, but mine is underneath my nose, cheekbones, and over the top of my face. And so I also have some migraine characteristics, as you can imagine, because of where this is located. I've tried everything for pain alleviation. I mean, I went through the traditional route of having all of about 30 different medications. I had Botox, blocks. I had all these procedures, things shot up my nose, blocks, all sort of things to try to help this pain. Finally, I was so ill that they opted to do a very dangerous procedure. It's a neurosurgery procedure where they go into your brain and release your nerve to try to help the irritation, the rubbing that they're thinking is causing this. So I had that in turn ended up not helping as much as I thought it would. I was still struggling, so I actually had a stimulator implanted in my face to try to help the pain. And again, that one failed. I actually had that removed last year. And so all of these have just not relieved my pain. So I ended up in pain management, where because, as John explained, the opioid crisis, they only give you a very small amount of pain medication, which I was fortunate to get even any pain medication. But they were giving me 2 pills every 24 hours. But like any medication, a pill wears off after about 4 to 5 hours. And so I really only had pain control for about 8 hours of the day. And so then the rest of the time, I either had to choose between sleeping at night or functioning in the day. And I was absolutely desperate and miserable. I thought medical cannabis would be my answer, but unfortunately, when I actually fought to try to bring that to Utah, And when it finally did come here legally, it just didn't help my pain. It made me really anxious, and I just could not stand that heady high feeling. And it just was not good at all, made my pain actually worse. So I was pretty discouraged. And then I had a friend tell me about Kratom and said, "You really need to try this. He has my same condition." And within 2 doses, I was like, I can't believe this actually works. This is unbelievable. I was getting the same pain relief I was getting from the opiate medication without any of the weird high feeling. In fact, I was like, this makes me feel like a normal person versus some altered, like I was taking something. And so it was a real miracle for me. I've been able to completely come off of my daily opioid use. I only take an opioid in a really severe flare, which is only a couple times a month. So for me, I only visit my pain doctor once a year, and he's just thrilled that I'm the patient that everyone wants, the real emergency access to those medications. So it really is a great alternative for people if they're choosing this over a pharmaceutical. With Kratom, we talked about how less is more with Kratom. Really, what you would want to do if you were taking this for Kratom or even for withdrawals, you would like to, you want to find that lowest dose that gives you the desired effects and then stick with that dose. Don't, you might have to adjust it a little bit, but don't just keep going higher and higher and higher and chasing that high. That's where you get into those, addictive of modes from that. Kratom effects last, several hours, and it really is an amazing, amazing product. And we talked a little bit about, the replacement with pharmaceuticals. There's in addiction, there's a lot of people that can't afford to go to a addiction facility or a rehab facility, and nor do they want to. They don't want to get on subs, and they want to try it this natural way. And so now we've got an option for them, and many have found this as an alternative to go into that. And we're going to hear a little bit later. I believe we have Misty. I think she's zooming in today. I haven't seen her on here, but maybe she is. She'll be telling us her story about that. The other thing that's important to know is that the struggle we have with Kratom is that there's still a big stigma involved. And it's really difficult because patients are very scared to tell their doctors that they are taking Kratom for fear that all of their pharmaceuticals are going to be taken away from them. They're going to be judged as, an addict, and it's a real stigma that we've got going on. That includes things like cannabis as well. We still have a long way to go in our society before we embrace alternative medicine. So we talked a little bit about the different types of kratom. So I love this slide because it really does show you the difference between this will transition us into the 7-OH products. You've got your natural whole leaf kratom plant. You've got a leaf, an actual leaf from nature that is processed into that powder or capsules or even the full spectrum liquid extracts. But then what someone has done, chemists have figured out a way to extract that 7-OH, that trace alkaloid that's in kratom, and put it into a completely synthetic product called 7-hydroxymitragynine or 7-OH. As you can see, these little tablets, they're about as far as you can get away from the actual plant medicine and the plant that we take. And so, just realize that 7-OH is not kratom. And, these are very, very different products. So, as we said, synthetic products are not kratom. Mostly what we're going to talk to you about today is 7-OH because that is the most prevalent synthetic. And by the way, you will hear it referred to as semi-synthetic because it really is a synthetic product, but because it is naturally occurring in a kratom product, that's where people will actually say it's semi-synthetic. But in reality, it's all lab produced. They actually use the same chemicals that they do to produce pool shock. So it's really not a safe product. Again, it's an extremely powerful product. It has a binding affinity 14 to 22 times greater than morphine. And these are being sold over the counter. You can see, I believe it was Heidi that took this picture, or maybe it was John, from an actual smoke shop. And you can see that's just right there in the open. These products right here. We're going to play you a video in a minute that will really show to you how powerful these little tablets truly are. And this is what we're most concerned about are these products. The animal studies have shown that these have demonstrated respiratory depression. You will see the 7-OH community saying, well, there's millions of dosings and servings that have been, that have been out there that people have been taking, and people are not dropping like flies. So no, it's nothing like a fentanyl product where, even touching it could actually cause an overdose. But the studies do show that there is true respiratory depression, especially in combination with other drugs and with alcohol. It really exacerbates the affinity of these products to make them absolutely deadly. The other problem with these products is they're extremely addicting. The synthetic 7-OH products have a very small half-life, which means that once they're in your system and you've taken them, it leaves your system quite quickly, and those withdrawals can kick in very, very quickly. From a lot of instances where we've heard Reddit feeds and other places, they have shown that within about 3 to 5 days of consuming 7-OH daily, you have addiction that has set in. You will actually get withdrawals within about 4 hours of consuming it. So this is a cash cow for these smoke shops and for online services, because these are about anywhere between $5 to $10 a tablet. And you think about it, if someone is that addicted that quickly, you have a guaranteed cash flow that's coming into your business. So these products are being pushed, and what they're doing is they're actually alluding the names to different narcotics. You'll see them. Go to the next slide here. You can see they do things like eat perks. They have opia. They have pressed. They have all of these names that allude to actual narcotics to make, of course, they're not going after the normal person. They're going after someone chasing that narcotic high. Scarily enough, we've actually seen them on the shelves in products that are marketed to children. These looks like gummies and ice cream cones. This is a cough syrup that they're doing. I actually saw one the other day. They were selling literally, I'm not kidding, they were selling a 5-pack of cough syrups. Who needs that much cough syrup? So obviously, it's definitely not cough syrup. And they have figured out how to put it into a vape format as well. So here is another good example of the problem with these products. When they were introduced into the market just about 2 years ago, which is a very short amount of time, the market has exploded with these products. What they have done is they have ridden the coattails of Kratom. It doesn't show on these products right here, but what they're doing is they're saying that they are Kratom. They're saying that they're Kratom products. A lot of the packaging will say advanced Kratom alkaloids. So a layperson walks in thinking, oh, I've heard about Kratom, and they walk in and they see these products and they're like, oh, it's Kratom. And the person at the front desk is saying, oh, you don't want the little extract or this little powder over here. This is what you want. This is the powerful stuff that's going to help your pain, and then it's going to get you off of your, harder drugs. And so people are often roped into these products unknowing, and then they form an extreme addiction to them very, very quickly. One thing want you to note here is the inaccuracy of the labeling as well. So look at this product. It's called 7-oxy, and it says it's 7-hydroxymetrogynine. But if you flip this package over, what it really is mitragynine pseudoindoxil, which is a synthetic version of 7-OH. So it's like one step further, even more powerful. And you're getting a very small amount of mitragynine and caffeine. So even buying this product, you think you're getting 7-OH, but you're really getting an even more powerful product called pseudoindoxil. So as you can see, they're very, very tricky in how they're doing the marketing. Um, you can see this tablet here. This is a 20 milligram tablet per tablet. They're typically scored and they're, the serving size will say, oh, take a fourth of this. Well, it's near impossible to split the pill. You know that the reality is most people are going to just take the entire pill. Now, scarily enough, these are 20 milligram pills, but they are actually, or tablets, they're actually marketing now all the way up to a 200 milligram tablet. So this is just a little Reddit quote that just really, really spells it out. 7-OH is dangerous. It should not be available with no regulations. Just take a peek at quitting 7-OH. And I honestly advise you to do that. You will not believe it. She said, here it is. The guy at the vape store gave me a sample of Pressed a year ago. It is not the same thing as Kratom. People have extreme withdrawals from it, and they really have issues coming off of 7-OH. So this video, I'm going to play this video for you, and nothing says it better than this.
To consume 200 milligrams of 7-hydroxymetragynine, you'd only have to consume these 4 small press tabs. Some you could throw in your hand, throw in your mouth, be down in just a second. To consume the same amount, 200 milligrams of 7-hydroxymetragynine through natural sources, you'd have to consume 476 of these 15 milliliter bottles, a tremendous amount. But then even more, if you wanted to consume that same 200 milligrams of 7-hydroxymetragynine, you'd have to consume 9.5 kilograms of raw leaf powder. The conversation isn't around banning raw leaf powder or predictable extract. The conversation's around just how easy and quick it is to consume this much highly addictive, highly potent synthesized 7-hydroxymetragynine. To consume 200 mil.
All right, before we go on to the science, I'd love to see if anybody here has any questions or has had any experience or heard about people that have been on Kratom or 7-OH. And, if there's something that you learned today, just in that section that you maybe didn't know before. And please feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand. And if we don't get anything, we'll just move on to Heidi.
I think Natalie raised her hand.
Oh, I can't tell. Sorry. You know what? You'll have to tell me, Heidi, because I'm looking
That's
at
okay.
2 screens.
That's quite all right.
Okay, Natalie.
Hi, how are you? I'm a peer support specialist with Hartford Healthcare, and I took this class because we have seen some coming into detox coming off of this. And it is amazing how even the clients are talking about how strong it is and how fast it happened and how detoxing was horrible for them. And and I was like, I never knew that there was a 7-OH. Now I know, but that's why I jumped into this class because I was like, another new drug. Oh my God,
Yeah. Yeah.
But so thank you. So what I've learned so far, even within the last, 30 minutes, has been amazing. Thank you. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad. And
Yep.
one thing I will say is that the catch term that you're seeing everywhere, you're going to see it now, is gas station heroin. And they're calling it gas station heroin everywhere you turn. But what they're not saying is really, quote, the gas station heroin is the 7-OH products, not the natural kratom products. So they're getting conflated. And now when you actually look at the media, you look at these stories, you're now going to be able to see, wow, they're not distinguishing between the two. They're still mixing them up. And so now it's twisting this in everyone's mind, thinking just like you did, Natalie, we have another drug epidemic out here.
Yeah, and I would like to say that the most important thing for clinicians is to request a sample or the exact product that that patient has been taking, because that will really help with the plan for withdrawal. So if they're taking a 7-OH product, you know that the withdrawals are going to be more severe and it's going to take longer and you're going to have to be more careful. Um, and most of the time, I think you'll find that they've either been taking 7-OH or a very highly concentrated extract in large amounts.
Mhm. Any other questions? All right, we'll move on to Heidi. Take her
All right.
away.
All right. So I'm Dr. Heidi Sikora. I'm a retired nurse practitioner and healthcare executive. And I've been taking Kratom actually for the past 7 years for multiple rare painful disorders. And I actually had a Chiari malformation, which is where the lower part of your brain falls through the opening of the skull and puts pressure against the spinal cord. In addition to that, I had a tethered spinal cord and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, multiple other things that really caused a lot of pain. And despite surgery, I really was not getting better. The other thing is that because of my brain condition, I'm very sensitive to anything that causes any kind of intoxication or something like an opioid. I was never able to tolerate that, especially because of the risk of falling, because I also had gait problems. So Kratom has really been the only thing that has helped my pain and fatigue. And unfortunately, my residence is in Wisconsin, which is a banned state. They banned it initially with the first FDA um, attempt to ban it when they discovered that it did not meet the criteria according to the 8-factor analysis, but Wisconsin has not reversed that ban. So I live part-time in Illinois and usually travel back and forth every week so that I can continue to take Kratom. And it has just tremendously improved my life to the point that I really don't have to take it every day anymore. I take it as I need it. So, so Laura and John, I think they did a great job of really talking about the base of evidence that is out there for the safety of kratom, that there really is, more than, I think it's actually 500 studies on kratom. The vast majority of those studies are actually animal or lab research studies. And so for human clinical trials, there's not a lot. And that's mostly because of the demonization that has happened about kratom, and the FDA was slow to really come to the table for it. But so what I'm going to talk about is overall evaluating that research. And so many times when somebody says, I've researched kratom and I know all about it, typically what they've done is a 60-second Google search. And that Google search will bring up things that are really not based on research, and a lot of it is misinformation and actually just misleading. So it's very important when evaluating research to take the time and the skill and the critical thinking to really read it and come to the appropriate conclusions. So, a key principle in evaluating research is that correlation does not imply causation. It's as silly as assuming a cat caused a roof to collapse, possible but highly improbable. Yet many media reports about kratom rely on the same flawed logic. So if you do that quick Google search, Mayo Clinic will be the first thing that comes up, and Mayo Clinic has never conducted research on kratom. In addition, I actually went through every reference for their site, and I can tell you that they do not support their conclusions. But if we look at Johns Hopkins and the University of Florida information, they actually have teams teams of researchers that are committed to furthering the science around kratom. And those researchers have published many peer-reviewed publications, and especially Dr. Christopher McCurdy. I think he alone has published over 200 papers, and that's much more reliable than the health letter from many of the leading health sites like me. So again, the correlation does not imply causation. That's so important to remember when we're evaluating the physical effects of kratom. So most of the claims regarding kratom's effects come from individual case reports or anecdotal accounts. So those are really prone to bias and do not establish causality. And there's many confounding variables. So a case report is just that. Somebody comes in and you take their word for what they took, and then you collect the data, but there's all these variables that may not be evaluated, such as polypharmacy, pre-existing health conditions, and other lifestyle factors. So it's impossible in a case report to isolate all those variables and determine the sole cause of that reported outcome. It does give us some ideas on what things to, look at in the future, but it certainly is not a conclusion. The other thing when really reading critically is to pay attention to terms like linked to, related to, associated with, potential effects. These all uh, really lack direct evidence, and they imply causality without supporting evidence. And this can really blow by a lot of people. And I hear it in media reports all the time, that you're left with the impression that kratom caused something. But if you listen carefully, you will find out that it was associated with, and it's just not clear the causality. So it can also really create unnecessary fear or stigma around the use of kratom. And that's very concerning for those that really benefit from it.
One thing I will add to that is it's the same thing when you're actually reading a media report. We just had in Utah, we have a senator that is hell bent on having kratom banned in the state, and he just did a podcast or a little interview, and he said, "Oh well, these products are everywhere. All a person has to do is come right up to the front check stand, and anybody can purchase them." But what they're not saying is that those products are behind, sure, they're at the counter, but they're just like cigarettes. They're held behind the counter, sold behind, glass. That is in Utah where it's regulated that way. But you can see how by twisting that, they, like Heidi said, cause a lot of fear and misinformation just by their wording. So just really watch closely in media reports as well.
Okay, titles can really be misleading, so it's important to read the whole article critically. Never rely on a title or abstract for a conclusion. And here's an example. Seizure and coma following kratom exposure. So the content of the article actually states that the patient's drug screen was positive for multiple other substances, including datura, which is known to cause seizures. Yet the article title and abstract, they only mention kratom. The authors actually acknowledge this bias in the article by stating it remains a leap to infer there is causality based on an association. But most people are just going to read that title and come to the conclusion that kratom caused a seizure, and that is not true at all based on this article. So kratom does metabolize through the liver, like 50% of drugs do, through the P450 pathway. CYP34A is the primary enzyme, but there's many others as well. So there have actually been 11 single patient case reports regarding liver issues since 2011. That's not a lot. But it still remains true that kratom can interact with some drugs, and it's important to talk to your doctor and pharmacist. And I really think that pharmacists are so valuable in this because they really check interactions much more closely than any usually prescriber will do. So here's just an example of one case study. The 58-year-old man, he was admitted for jaundice and possible liver damage. There was no toxicology test completed for other substances. And that's really important. We see that quite a lot in that, they'll blame mitragynine for an outcome, and then you come to find out that they only tested for mitragynine. So that's an important issue as well. Prior to the visit, this patient had blood work done, which already showed liver abnormalities. So he already had liver problems. And kratom was discontinued and then reintroduced without the reoccurrence of any liver test abnormalities. And the patient didn't have any more abnormalities, even though he resumed taking kratom. So if we look at the liver toxicity of evidence for kratom, as I said before, there's been 11 single case studies, and all of them had confounding variables. If we compare that to Tylenol, now of course there's so many more doses of Tylenol per year than kratom. However, Tylenol does lead to 30,000 hospitalizations a year, and it's the #1 cause of liver transplantation in the United States. And we still have 300 people that die annually from acetaminophen toxicity. So I think the moral of the story here is that there is no safe substance. You have to be careful with all substances, including kratom. The other thing that we hear often in media stories are seizures. And there's a very recent systematic review, and that's a high level of evidence where they review all of the studies out there and reports for a certain thing. And this one was regarding kratom and seizures in 2025. And here's a quote from their conclusion. Based on our narrative review, we conclude there is insufficient evidence to suggest that kratom causes seizures, primarily due to the absence of a quantitative dose response in toxicology reports, incomplete medical records, and because seizures occur relatively frequently in the general population. There was another comprehensive review in 2024, kratom safety and toxicology in public health context. I think this was an excellent review. And the takeaway, bottom line, is that kratom, as Laura said, it's a partial mu opioid agonist. It does not recruit the beta arrestin pathway, and so it does not lead to respiratory depression. And they did include the FDA statement in that comprehensive review, where they said in rare cases, deaths have been associated with kratom use, as confirmed by a medical examiner or toxicology reports. However, in these cases, kratom was usually used in combination with other drugs, and the contribution of kratom in the death is unclear. If we contrast that with full agonist opioids, such as oxycodone, morphine, fentanyl, we know that they cause respiratory depression, and that's the primary cause of death from those substances. Almost 80,000 people died from opioid overdose in 2023, and 13,000 of those were actually from prescription opioids. So sometimes, you'll hear people say, well, it's not safe because my doctor didn't prescribe it. Well, everything a doctor prescribes is not safe either. So, we just need to be really careful with any substance that we take. There was a study done by Dr. Kirsten Smith on the effects of kratom on driving. And so this study size was sufficient, 350 participants, and they did a detailed survey, an ecological momentary assessment, which is basically they're just writing down everything on a daily basis related to their kratom intake and their driving. So, and then what they did is they took 10 of those people and they actually did an in-person study. And the bottom line is that there were no significant changes in simulated driving performance after taking kratom. Now, I've done my own little self-assessment on driving with kratom, and I can tell you that I cannot park straight without kratom. But when I take kratom, man, I'm right in the lines. The other thing is that driving at night, I just don't want to do it without kratom. With kratom, I'm much safer to drive at night. That's just my own personal experience.
Because it does help with focus. And
Absolutely.
a lot of students actually use Kratom versus dosing with high energy drinks and and caffeine. They will actually take a couple of Kratom capsules and it helps them focus and concentrate when they need that. So I know that's
Yeah. I would
very
say
much
that
the case.
the focus is, for me, it's more gentle and it more sustained than caffeine. Caffeine is a big bump and then a crash, and kratom is not that way for me. So the FDA actually did a single ascending dose study in 2024. Took them a long time to publish it because I think they were disappointed in the positive results. So what they did is they took, it's actually a controlled trial. So they had a placebo group that did not take, the kratom, but they gave them the same pills and like a fiber pill, looked the same, etc. And then the group that actually had the kratom, and then they start, with a low dose, and then they increase until they found the first adverse event. And so both groups had nausea at 12 grams. So that's pretty incredible. 24 capsules, um, that in a 5 minute period of time. And the only event was the nausea. And so they concluded that kratom is tolerable at all dose levels under the tested, amounts. And that laid the groundwork for a human abuse potential study, which is currently underway at Baylor College of Medicine. So key kratom study findings. So of course, whole leaf kratom does not lead to respiratory depression. It does not recruit the beta arrestin pathway like classical opioids. And John talked about the John Hopkins survey, and less than 10% reported mild symptoms of kratom use disorder. John referred to the 3%, and that's for the more severe. And of course, there's a difference between addiction and dependence, and where that line is as far as that report is not real clear. Kratom has a wide safety range in dosing, and despite millions of users, there are rare physical reports of physical physical harm from kratom alone. And of course, I'm talking about natural kratom and mitragynine in safe levels. Okay, so if we put this in the risk in perspective, and we're always balancing, benefits and harms, prescription deaths far outpace kratom deaths. Again, opioids, 13,000 a year. In 2023, benzodiazepines are the next leading cause, and methadone over 7,000, et cetera. Gabapentin over 3,000. And so there really is nothing that is safe. It's a matter of really assessment and making sure that combinations are the doses minimal, and the combinations are very carefully thought through. There are kratom and drug interactions, like I think I said before. And combining kratom with other drugs can raise or lower the drug's concentration in the body. Grapefruit also uses that same pathway, the P450 pathway, and it is known to increase kratom levels. And of course, interactions vary by drug. The most concerning interactions are like anesthesia, and that's why it's so important to be honest about kratom intake, because something like Versed, if you take kratom and Versed together, which is a anesthetic, um, that's used for different types of operations. So it will raise the plasma concentrations of that Versed. And if you disclose that, they're going to monitor for that. And so that's really important to consult your healthcare provider or pharmacist about possible interactions with all medications, especially when hospitalized or anticipating that. Okay, so, taking kratom with other substances absolutely increases the risk. We know with opioids, it's going to be increased risk of respiratory depression. Benzodiazepines, increased risk of sedation. Antidepressants will be increased risk of serotonin syndrome. And diphenhydramine or Benadryl, you have to be careful of Benadryl with anything because it definitely increases the risk of sedation and drowsiness. And of course, alcohol and kratom absolutely do not mix because it will increase sedation and respiratory depression. So, if somebody's on a medication, I'm not saying they should stop taking it. I'm not giving any medical advice at all. What I'm saying, it's really important to talk to your provider about that because adjustments can be made on medications. And we can go to the next slide, Laura. So safe use principles for kratom, use the minimal effective dose. So we always say less is more. More kratom does not work better. So, if you've been on a particular, dose of kratom and, you need more, you just have to be really careful about, increasing slowly. If it's not working, go back down. It really reduces the risk of side effects and drug interactions. Limit the duration of use. And I think this is really important that, it really prevents dependence and long-term health risks. So people don't necessarily need to be on, pain medication forever. Sometimes, like me, I really got to the point where I could back down on it and take tolerance breaks. It helps maintain the effectiveness and really reduces the risk of escalating doses. Um, it also protects liver enzyme pathways from overload and all those risks that I already talked about. It supports safer, more sustainable use for those using kratom.
I'm going to add one thing. But there are people like myself. I don't have that. I've never had not even a small pain-free moment in 13 years. So
Mhm.
there are people that really depend on some form of pain medication. Also, and so I have used daily actually for 8 years with no problems. I also know of an individual who used kratom as a harm reduction tool, and she's been able to stay clean for over 8 or 9 years, and she just takes that dose of kratom just to again to keep her levels because you know what, as you guys know, addiction is a complicated thing. People don't usually have other issues like trauma, sexual abuse, all these things that have precipitated some of these of their addiction. The ability to have them become addicted, and those don't typically go away. And so that's what's nice is to have something safe like kratom to help negate that for people.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But the minimal effective dose and the shortest duration is, I mean, it really is it's something that is important to consider. But there are many people, and I had to take it every day for years before I got well enough that I could start to back off on it. So I just want to talk a minute about why kratom stigma is harmful. And I did publish actually an article about this, and it's really important to be careful about the stigma. And that's really part of why I do what I do, because it heightens anxiety and fear. And people who benefit from Kratom often feel judged or marginalized. I cannot even tell you how much stress it causes every time those of us who really need Kratom. And even though I don't have to take it every day all the time anymore, when I need it, I need it. And it really helps me recover quickly. So every time we hear these negative reports, it is just so anxiety producing, and um, it, it's just really hard. So it also discourages honest communication. So that's my biggest concern, is patients hiding their Kratom use from their healthcare providers, fearing rejection or dismissal. And I would say, if you can't be honest with your healthcare provider, then maybe that's not the right one, because it's absolutely critical to be able to do that. Lack of disclosure can really lead to dangerous medication interactions or missed opportunities. And so being honest about it is very important. And one more word, you know, when people have, problems with addiction, they can also have problems with pain. And so the conundrum is, if they have to stop opioids because of their addiction and they have severe chronic pain, what what are they going to do? And how much risk is there for somebody that, has to stop an opioid, but now they're in pain? And the risk of, going back to that opioid is higher if their pain is not treated. So if Tylenol doesn't work at a safe dose level, if NSAIDs, you can't take those long term, every day, because of GI problems, we really have to think through, how are we going to treat their pain and what is safe for them? And the answer cannot be that we're not going to treat it, because that is, first of all, not humane, and secondly, is going to put them at great risk. So I think that, okay. So here are leading researchers on Kratom, and we have video clips in here that you can go and you can listen to them, their actual testimonies. And so I think that is about all I have to say.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I highly suggest you click these. And again, they are clickable links when you receive the PDF, because they're just amazing. And I mean, these are from people like NIDA and, renowned toxicologists. These are no small fries here.
And yes, I will share the links I have a couple articles that I've published. And then I'm looking at the questions, Laura.
Yeah,
You
me too. I
mentioned
just saw them.
you mentioned a safe level of mitragynine. Um, so, the level that's consistent with the natural plant is, what I consider a safe level. So, if in less than 2% of 7-OH, so if it's hyper concentrated, that's where I get concerned about, like the pure mitragynine extracts, um, that, you have to be more careful with. And as far as dosing for Kratom, it's individualized. And, the rule of thumb is always, start at the lowest, possible dose and go up slowly until the effect, that you're looking for. For powder, that's, you know, I think easier to manage, because you can, get a gram scale and do it very slowly. When you're talking about concentrated extracts, you have to be even more careful with starting, by the recommended serving size on the product itself. And maybe, doing half of that and then, going up slowly. So start low, go slow, but, keep going slowly until you find what works.
And I would suggest starting with the powder, absolutely. Because as you said, if you start with the extracts and you could build a tolerance a lot more quickly than you can with the actual powder. So again, we just all of us, are in support of the extracts, but they need to be respected and the dosing followed strictly on those bottles. Any other questions that you have in the science section at all? We'd love to, either you can write them in the chat, and of course you can think about it and write them in the chat. We can talk afterward, but if there aren't any questions, we'll move on to John's section.
Thank you, Laura, you and Heidi. Laura, can you go to the next slide, please? Laura, I get reprimanded if I don't follow the slides because I like to run off the rails pretty easy.
We'll
But
keep them in check.
yeah, but when you think about it, anytime you can get a consumer to pivot from a one pill kill product to a Kratom product, especially if it's a GMP FDA regulatory package product, that is unequivocally a win. And you think about this, you got people out there doing these products off the street. They don't have a clue what they're doing. They think it's fentanyl, they think it's meth, they think it's crack, they're just so dangerous and deadly. But when you can purchase an FDA GMP product, a Kratom product, at least you know what you're taking every single time you take it. And it just, I don't see how anybody can argue with that. And I personally have witnessed time and time again and continue today to witness newcomers. They come into my home group, they're strung out, they don't know what to do. It's a Friday night, it ain't a hard ass to say, look, run down to the vape shop, you know, Google Kratom, see what it tells you. Monday morning, I'll get you over to a provider if you still want some help with the clinician. So it's just a no-brainer to me. And most opiate addicts will report that, Kratom is some of them say it works just as good as Suboxone. Some of them say it's not quite as good, but it works. A handful will say it doesn't work as good. So that's kind of all over the map. And Kratom, the powder product, it's very affordable. I think it typically runs about $1 a gram. And let's say you consume 2 to 3 grams 2 to 3 times a day. That's only $10 a day. And keep in mind, I heard a rumor come out of Washington that they're going to cut back on Medicaid reimbursement, which funds, I do believe, probably 90% of the Suboxone distribution in America. So, what are all these people going to do, 5 years down the road when we're back to the pre-Medicaid expansion era? And and not everybody that takes Kratom, they want to go on to other bigger, badder drugs. So that's just a myth. Now, I consistently, get emails regularly from people to say, John, I was drinking 2 fifths of liquor a day. I tried treatment, AA, everything. But man, when I found Kratom, I ain't had a drink in 5 years. And so how can you argue with this type of, anecdotal evidence out there? And speaking of anecdotal evidence, most scientists concur that when you get, an X amount of these anecdotal reports, and it becomes real evidence. Those suffering from substance use disorders can have physical pain conditions. Kratom can be a viable option to treat their pain and to transition them away from harmful opioids or illicit drugs. And that kind of caters to my point to occasional Kratom consumption. I don't want to. I hate going to the doctor. I do not want to get on some sort of pharma regimen that I'm expected to take the rest of my life. I'm trying to avoid that for as long as possible. So, a lot of old timers aging out in recovery, and they might want the option for plant-based medicine. And by God, it should be available. Next slide, please.
Yeah, one thing I'll add is we actually just had a call last week, and we were talking to some Utah advocates, and one individual, remember, John, he did say he was an alcoholic, and because of using Kratom, he's been able to completely be clean off of alcohol. So we heard it firsthand last week from,
Well,
it was
well,
amazing.
I mean, there's thousands of those people
Oh
nationwide.
yeah, it was really neat to see that though in my own state. The other thing I did, it just triggered me. There's two places you can, well, a couple places you can purchase Kratom. it is more reasonable to purchase Kratom from an online source. But it is important that it is available in places like vape shops, smoke shops. We're hoping to eventually get the products into like health food stores and things, just so, there's not the stigma, excuse me, of walking into a smoke shop. But it is important there because, as you'll hear from Misty in just a minute, her situation, people need to have instant access to these products, especially if they're wanting to, pivot between that one pill kills.
Very good. The addiction profile, addictive 7-OH products, they're being misrepresented as Kratom, which causes tremendous amount of confusion, which only, puts fire on the stigma associated with Kratom. The vast majority of Kratom consumers, they're not abusing these products. And that's important. When I got involved with advocating for this industry, I've noticed that there's just tens of thousands of Kratom consumers. They're horrified that a product that has proven to save their life is being demonized and stigmatized. And it's no wonder more people don't speak up and step up. I remember 20 years ago when I was going down to the state capitol to advocate for recovery support services, some of the politicians would look at me like this is a crazy guy, don't listen to him. That's because of stigma. Stigma continues to kill over and over and over again. Of course, caution should be taken if consuming kratom, especially the extracts, since they contain more concentrated metragedin content and become more quickly called as tolerance issues. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of these extracts, especially the ones that got, a lot of doses in a really small container. And that's why regulations are so important, to limit these producers as to, what they can actually put in the marketplace. Kratom does have a potential to lead to dependence in some individuals, especially those with past drug abuse. Now, I go to my home group. I'm a 12-stepper every Sunday night. I do my jail meeting on Tuesday nights. I do my group every Wednesday. And I do not, suggest newcomers or people in early recovery, if they haven't never seen Kratom or heard of it, I'll steer them away from it for sure. It's just not a product, because a lot of addicts like to pivot from one pill, from a one get high drug to another. And if you consume more than you should have Kratom, there is a little bump there. So, I don't really recommend it. But at the same time, if if you do find it and it does help you pivot, you shouldn't be demonized for that. Next slide. And here's Misty, I do believe. Y'all gonna like Misty.
I saw her here, so.
Oh, she's there. I see her hair.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
It's all you, Misty. Welcome to the event.
Are we on?
You're on, baby.
You're muted.
Hell, I heard her say something.
Oh, she's saying just a minute, I think.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry. Too many gadgets going on right now. But yeah, I am. My name is Misty Brown, and I was an active addict from 2008 to 2019. I am a survivor of the overprescribing opioid epidemic. That was me. I started going to chronic pain management for my degenerative disc disease in my back. And I actually started going to pain management in 2006. I started going for migraines. And even then, I was my mind was blown how many pills you could get every month. But when I was diagnosed with degenerative disc disease in 2008, the pills, the amounts of pills that I kept getting kept coming and coming and coming. But when I found Kratom in 2019, I was not looking for recovery at all. I was just looking for something to help with my withdrawals. And each day that I was taking Kratom and, the farther away from the last time I snorted a pill or smoked a pill off of foil or snorted cocaine, I was like, wait a minute, there's something to this. So, when the first day that I took Kratom, I was like, like, I don't know if anybody can relate to this, but when I took it, I started cleaning my house, and it wasn't until I went to bed that night and I was like, I did all this without being high on a pill. I cooked dinner for my kids. I did laundry. I was listening to music. I felt music sounded better again. It's like I wasn't all numbed up or doped up. And that right there was like what planted the seed in my head. I was just like, wait, there's something to this. And so what I can say is that when I did find it, that I was still in that addict mindset. I was still trying to my behaviors, habits, routines, and rituals were still turned on full swing. And I was so used to popping pills every 2 to 3 hours that I caught myself doing the same thing with Kratom powder. And I even got up to taking 5 teaspoons 5 times a day, and I still never got that euphoria high that I hear people talking about. I was just overloading my body full of plant matter. And so when I started seeing the signs everywhere in the Kratom support community about less is more, that's when I applied it. Not only did I apply it to my Kratom, I applied it to my life too. So I started what we call dosing down, and for 4 years straight, I took Kratom every day for 4 years straight. And then a couple years ago, I challenged myself because, I always hear those terms, once an addict, always an addict, all that stuff that, like, I'm on social media, so I get hit a lot from like the abstinent community, and so I always hear these terms. So a couple years ago, I challenged myself and I was like, you know what? I'm not going to take any today. And so I would not take any Kratom for 1 day a week. Then the next week I went 2 days without Kratom, then 3 days without Kratom, then 4 days without Kratom. Now I just take, 1 teaspoon once a day, and then I take 1 to 4 days off every week. I do not crave it when I don't have any. My mind is not going a million miles a minute trying to figure out, where I could get some more or which drug dealer I'm going to call, like how I was in active addiction. I'm not in that whole chaotic use mindset anymore. And I always credit Kratom for allowing me to work on my whys of addiction. And this 7-OH, when I testified, like I testified at my Colorado Capitol, I was like, whole leaf Kratom is an exit from addiction. These synthetic 7-OH products are an entrance into one. And so I am glad that you guys are here today to be able to, I didn't even realize that you guys were like a peer support recovery training type thing. So I'm glad that you guys are here today to learn the difference, because it is vitally important. And if you got people coming in saying that they're addicted to Kratom, you need to ask what kind, what kind of Kratom, because these 7-OH products are being masqueraded around as being a more potent form of Kratom when it's not. It is not. I like to equate it to, you guys remember the Spice K2 bath salt epidemic? This is pretty much a repeat of that. And it boggles my mind, because us advocates are having to freaking work overtime. We don't get paid to do what we do, but we're having to work overtime to constantly correct the media, correct the people that come commenting on my stuff, and it's just like, I don't know. I'm not the Misty I was before, so I don't get angry or, want to go pop off on somebody. But it's just not fair. Let me just put it that way. But yeah, I survived the overprescribing epidemic. I don't know if anybody in this chat is, from that era, but it was rough. It was rough.
We're glad we have you, Misty. She's an amazing story, and she really does work. She's not kidding when she says she works overtime. She does. Because just like her shirt said, Kratom saved me. So
yes,
she wants to pass that on, and certainly it certainly saved me, and I know Heidi would say the same, and John too. So thank you so much,
Can
Misty. Yes.
Before you go on, I just want to address a question that Joy had in the chat, because other people might have the same question. She asked, what's a safe level of mitragynine? And I just want to say that that's something that I don't think we covered, and I'm not sure that we will in the future slides. So Kratom has over 40, and I think they've identified over 50 alkaloids in the plant. But there's, about 4 to 5 that are really active. Mitragynine is one of them. The next one is speciogynin, that they feel like it really helps with pain as well. And several others that I'll probably mess up the pronunciation, so I won't. But those of us that take the whole leaf, I feel like there's a big benefit to all of the alkaloids in the plant. So there are extracts that are full spectrum extracts that have all of those alkaloids. And then there are extracts that only have mitragynine. And so, my personal bias is that the whole leaf provides a benefit versus just the mitragynine. Other people feel differently, but so as far as mitragynine only, it's about 1 to 3% of the gram weight. So if you were going to take, let's say, 1 gram of kratom powder, you'd be getting approximately 10 grams of mitragynine alone. So when you're looking at a concentrated mitragynine product, that's important to keep that in mind. And as Laura said, I think it is absolutely safest to start with kratom powder, and a lot of us just stick with powder because it works well, and I think it gives a very balanced effect, including, on the dopamine receptors, serotonergic receptors, adrenergic. So it's definitely broad spectrum. I hope
Your body, sorry, Heidi, but your body will let you know. If you take too much kratom, you will puke. There is no stopping that exorcist puking that comes with that.
Misty always has a great way of explaining things.
It's a trial and error. It really is. And like whenever people are new to finding kratom, especially when they're trying to come off of illicit fentanyl or the 7-OH stuff, I always tell them, don't give up. You will find your magic sweet spot, is what we say. Just don't give up. If you take too much, the first thing that will happen is you'll get the wobbles. It feels like your eyes are taking pictures, like they're and they're vibrating. So and then a quick cure for that is to make yourself puke. But if you take too much, you will puke. Not overdose and die.
All right. John, you want to cover the Suboxone?
Well, Suboxone is the main method of treatment for substance use disorders, especially the opiate. They only supposed to use it for opiate, I do believe. The FDA warned that this drug has been known to cause severe dental decay. It's not meant to be taken long term. Now, I do want to point this out. I noticed back in 2004 when we pioneered Butte, it was like a 5-day, maybe 7-day detox product. And I noticed back then that for the folks that took it more than 7 days, they become addicted to it. So then they'd go into a maintenance or replacement therapy. And then I noticed along the way the mindset of Suboxone providers and American Society of Addiction Medicine. They shifted in their thinking, saying, okay, look, if you're coming from an illicit opiate market and you're getting into Suboxone, it's best that you just kind of stick with Suboxone indefinitely so you can avoid relapsing back to a 1-pill kill. And okay, that makes sense in a medical sense to my addict brain. Well, there are some cases out there that you can get addicted to, kratom. Okay. Now, if kratom's the only product you were taking, then I would think it'd be appropriate, and they do use Suboxone to help you wean off of kratom addiction. Then I think it would be appropriate to get back to the 5 to 7-day detox step down, knowing that if the individual relapses, they're going to go back to that FDA protocol, good manufacturing practice product, kratom. They're not going to go back to something they weren't taking before. So I think there's some wiggle room on these protocols moving forward. And there is no DSM-5 ASAM approved kratom treatment out there. It's up to the individual providers, aka Suboxone doctors, to decide how to deal with this. So they have yet to I guess document or formalize a real kratom treatment. The U.S. Suboxone market is estimated to be valued at several $billions, and that's only going up. So I think that when we testify and advocate for kratom to be regulated and to remain in the marketplace for responsible adult consumption, you know, these people, I feel like part of their motivation is protect market share. And, I said it earlier in my open dissertation that the FDA, they're very biased toward only prescribed medication. They disregard and disrespect plant medicine. And I just think that's the wrong approach. And as an advocate, and maybe a borderline libertarian, I got to believe there's a place for plant medicine in America. We need to get off our high horse and make that happen. Um, the withdrawals, kratom withdrawals, they can occur. Consumers usually characterize it as mild to moderate. I have heard of some of them are terrible. I've heard people say, oh, it's just like, worse than fentanyl. Well, yeah, what were you taking? Were you taking a 708 heavy product or were you just taking a plant product? And I've, in my 43 years in recovery in the last 10 years, I've met 3 raw kratom powder plant addicts, and all 3 of them eventually they either reduced their intake or they did get off of it. So it's doable. And for the old timers on this call, in the old days, all detox was in a jail cell. So, there's nothing new here. Factors that can play in the withdrawal. The poison's always in the dose. So if you're taking a high amount, I suspect the withdrawal is going to be worse. And you just got to know your what it is you're taking. Now, they do say, you can taper down. I've heard this said over and over and over. Reddit speaks to it. If let's say somehow on the raw kratom products, you get up to 100 grams a day, which is a tremendous amount. I don't know how anybody can get up there, but they do it. They say just take 10% less per week. Yes, it's a mind game at that point. That's why social supports are so important, and you telling on your disease is so important. So these systems are really yet to be formalized, and in an organization like CCAR, you'll have an opportunity here to maybe start collecting some data on this stuff, and you guys can make history moving forward. So anyways, Laura.
One thing I have to say is it honestly is really no different than a lot of pharmaceutical withdrawals. I was on a high dose of gabapentin and I tried to stop quickly to try this one medical procedure. I tried to stop within 10 days of 3,600 milligrams a day, which is the highest you can take. And I thought I was going to die. So I went back and got back up on my dose, and I took 6 months to get off of my gabapentin. So there, again, it's no different than some of these pharmaceuticals. You definitely have to realize that you have to taper.
And I do want to, it's so important to know that there's a big difference between dependence and addiction. A lot of people are dependent, and Laura just said it, like gabapentin. She became dependent on it. But if she were an addict, she would have, been out there stealing for money to pay for her gabapentin, public safety threat. And, millions of Americans, they're dependent on tremendous amounts of prescribed medication. That doesn't make them an addict. You got to know the difference between addiction and dependence. And kratom, there are a lot of dependent kratom consumers. They depend on it to solve their medical conditions or their recovery from active addiction condition. That's not a bad thing. That's all manageable. It's, the addiction, when you start, committing crimes, lying to your family, ruining your life, what that pretty much defines the addict. And there's just so few kratom addicts out there. I mean, natural raw leaf kratom addicts. It's just, out of all the things you can become addicted to, Kratom has I'll say the best addiction profile because it's the least amount of people get addicted to it. And I think that's a win for our community and our society.
Thank
Uh,
you. Thanks, John. Anything else you have to say before we move on to this next section real quickly?
I just have one thing to say because I think I misspoke when talking about mitragynine content in kratom powder. So if 1 gram of powder would actually be 10 milligrams of mitragynine. So very sorry about that.
That's great. Thanks for clearing that up. So again, I know you have all heard of an uptick in, hey, this kratom has killed me or killed my child or this or that. We wanted to address this because this is something incredibly important that we're seeing more and more, especially in the media. I won't go through this alone, but as you can see, there's obviously lots of other substances that cause deaths, but typically those get pushed aside as not even an issue. And they tend to focus on kratom alone. In fact, in many of these situations where there's the death, there's actually been a person who it said in the newspaper that the person had died in a car accident of kratom, but they realized they had like 10 bottles of vodka on or whatever on the seat, and they were drunk, and yet there was a kratom capsule in their car, and so they assumed it was a kratom death. So you're going to see this over and over again, but realize again, very, very small amount that is tied to actual kratom. So again, I want you to think about this now when you hear about these deaths that are occurring. We're seeing this over and over in all of these situations. And you won't believe this, but they've actually found out that in some of these, if the decedent is found and there is kratom somewhere at the scene, if it's in their bedroom or whatever, they will instantly assume that it was a mitragynine death, and they will only test in the toxicology for mitragynine. That literally we've seen that happen before. The other thing is that they have to consider all the circumstances of the death. There's been situations where, again, someone has literally choked on vomit because they had been deceased, but they blame that on kratom. Well, the reality is they aspirated, and various things could have caused that. But they're zoning in on this one cause of death because it's the catchphrase of the moment of, kratom's killing me. The other thing that we tend to see that they don't do a very tight investigation of their past drug use history, also their health records and what's going on there. In many of the situations, you'll see individuals where they're saying, well, kratom killed me. We just saw this, or that I become severely addicted to kratom. There's a gentleman that I saw in one of the recent Utah reports that he took one bottle of an extract, and within 5 days, he was up to $100 a day habit, 10 bottles a day. And yet he was blaming that on the kratom. And then if something occurs where the person is decedent, they again blame it on, it becomes this blame game that happens in many situations. The most important thing that we're not seeing is the distinguishing between the 7-OH versus the synthetic products. In almost every situation, they don't say this decedent was taking 7-OH. They typically just call it kratom. And there's family members that claim that the decedent was spending hundreds of dollars per day. And so again, if you hear that, it's most likely 7-OH that's abused, because there's no way you could be spending hundreds of dollars a day. For example, if you were to take powder, you think of a Ziploc baggie that's about 2/3 of the way full. If you purchase that's about a kilogram of powder. That typically costs about $100. And that's 2/3 of a bag. And most people are taking one, which is 1,000 grams. Most people take 1 to 3 grams in their dose. So again, it would be near impossible because, like Misty said, you would throw up profusely if you ate that much. Also, you've got your extracts as well. most people typically would not be taking, 10 extracts per day. They're in serious addiction mode there. Again, surviving family members will often dismiss some of their drug-seeking behaviors, and they'll assign blame to kratom. We hear this over and over again too. They say, "Well, we thought that it was natural and safe. We've been told it was natural and safe." But again, that same natural and safe person walked in, and it would be like saying, "Well, oh, I like this soda pop that's an energy drink. Well, I'm going to take 10 of those and start taking 10 of them a day." I mean, there's obviously addiction that's happening. Everyone knows, you need to do your research, buyer beware, know what you're, ingesting in your system. But to say that they thought the product was natural and safe and they were taking 10 bottles a day, it's not really, they realized what they were doing. And so, but a lot of times these parents are saying, "Oh, it was a powdered kratom death only." We're hearing that, or it was before 7-OH was in existence. But in every single one of these situations, the toxicology report is never shared. So it makes it very, very difficult for people to refute these deaths, because they're only sharing the fact that it says that it was a mitragynine death. If you actually, I did this, by the way, I talked to a top toxicologist, and he had said, "Go ahead and Google to see how often cause of death is incorrect." I'm like, "What? Well, isn't it always correct?" He goes, "No." He said, "If you do a toxicology screen and they say, for instance, fentanyl is in the system, they need to be darn sure that it's really fentanyl. But when that coroner, who's often not times they've only gone through a coroner course, they're not even medically trained very much, they will do a cause of death. You look online and Google, it's typically 30 to 40% of the time, if they really break that death apart, it's an incorrect cause of death. So a lot of the legislation and all these arguments are happening when, sadly, some of these causes of deaths were just incorrect. One last thing too, really, really important, are these last two things. You will often see them saying that, "Oh, well, there was an overdose of kratom, but they were revived because of naloxone." Naloxone does not reverse the effects of natural kratom, but it absolutely reverses that and is utilized in 7-OH overdoses. So, but again, like we always say, when in doubt, never hesitate to use naloxone. But if you do hear they have been revived from that, it is most likely you're dealing with a 7-OH product. Again, this quote was utilized earlier, but I want to just show you, in rare cases, this is what the FDA said: rare cases, deaths have been associated with kratom use as confirmed by a medical examiner or toxicology reports. However, in these cases, kratom is usually used in combination with other drugs, and in the contribution of kratom in the deaths is unclear. So now we'll move quickly, and we're just going to skirt through this last little bit, is the government regulations and safety that are around kratom. So you've heard a little bit of allusions to what's happened with the FDA and the DEA over the years, but real quickly, I will go through this. In 2016, there was a big push from the FDA for the DEA to schedule kratom, and they wanted it to be a Schedule 1. And so the DEA took it on themselves to complete what they call an 8-factor analysis to determine if it was sufficient, there was sufficient evidence to actually schedule it. In 2018, Assistant Secretary of Health Brett Jawar, he withdrew the FDA's scheduling recommendation, and he cited disappointingly poor evidence and data and a failure to consider the overall public health. This is the first time in history that the DEA has withdrawn a scheduling request. So this was a historic day. There are some states back when this was going on in 2016 that said, "Wow, this is going to be illegal." Just like Heidi said in Wisconsin, "We're just going to make it all illegal in our state. We're going to beat them to the punch." But then when it was withdrawn, some of those states have not come back and actually reversed that ban. Rhode Island is the first one that's actually had that reversal, and they will now be legal in 2026. Heidi went through the single ascending dose study that happened in 2024. And most importantly, happened this year. So the FDA published a safety notice regarding 7-OH. They said, this is bad news. And on July 29th, the FDA admonished the DEA to begin the scheduling process for the 7-OH product. So much like what happened in 2016. But in September of this year, the 8-factor analysis was completed on 7-OH and it failed. It was the recommendation from the 8-factor analysis was that it should be a Schedule 1 and they should begin the scheduling process. And again, we're waiting to hear what the FDA is going to do. But because of the fact that it did fail that 8-factor analysis, it is most likely going to go through the scheduling process. I'm going to show you this slide real quickly, this quick little video, because there's been a lot of confusion. A lot of people are saying, you'll see in the media again, where they said, oh, the FDA wants to ban Kratom. They want to ban Kratom. They want to schedule it. They want to schedule it. But listen for yourselves of what they are saying.
We owe it to the American people to act decisively, and that's what we're doing today, initiating a process to schedule 7-OH as an illicit substance.
We're not targeting the kratom leaf or ground up kratom. We are targeting the concentrated synthetic byproduct that is an opioid. Well, first of all, kratom is different from 7-OH. Kratom is not our focus. The kratom leaf has been around for centuries. Some physicians have some health concerns with kratom. Some people describe those as minimal health concerns. Some say there's health benefits. We're not talking about kratom. We're not targeting kratom.
What is it that you're cracking down on? You just announced this yesterday. You're going after a synthetic version of it?
We don't want to get caught flat-footed again. There's a product that's a synthetic product in the vape stores that are popping up on every corner in America. And we want to educate people about that product. It's called 7-OH. It has many other names. When you go really broad and say, look, everything is your brain on drugs, you're not really appropriately risk stratifying to parents who should know. It's important to distinguish the lexicon here. So the kratom plant, which has been used in teas and other substances for centuries, may have some minimal health concerns, but it's not our focus. It's a synthetic concentrated byproduct that is stronger than oxycodone. That's where we're going to focus, and that's where I think we can distinguish where the real public health harm is. This 7-OH product can be deadly.
We owe it to...
So this is a map of the current legality in the United States for kratom. So the blue states are those states that have passed what they call the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. The states that are in green, they are still legal. There is no regulation. What is scary about that is then those 7-OH products that we talked about are being freely sold over the counter in all of these green states. In some of the states that, like the red states, there are some regulations, some bans in place, but others, again, they're fighting to either pass a full ban or to pass that Kratom Consumer Protection Act. We're trying to, educate these states and all of the country to be able to show them the facts that we're sharing with you today, to show them that the best choice is regulation and not banning.
Laura, I do
Yes.
want to add that Connecticut this year,
Good point.
the state of Connecticut, I think at a late night hour, they banned kratom in Connecticut, and it's going through the public hearing section right now. But they did that without really a hearing on it for the public or for the advocates to speak to the issue. So like overnight, they slipped in a ban bill in Connecticut. So y'all be careful in Connecticut. I do believe it's going to end up being banned, or, hopefully during their public comment period, they got some sense and they're going to regulate it. So I don't
But
know.
he's not kidding. It was literally like at 8 o'clock at night on the night before when the session was over. They slipped this in. Okay, so these are the key elements of the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. Again, this is something that we will be pushing in Connecticut and these other states. These are in place in a state like Utah, where I am. These laws are in place. There's age restrictions or an age gate. So typically it's either 18 to 21. Most these days are passing 21 plus. Good manufacturing practices, proper labeling. So if you go and purchase a product, you can understand that this is a safe product. It's been tested for heavy metals, contaminants, salmonella, and such, and it's been properly labeled so that it has all the appropriate FDA labeling language on it. It has dosing on it. And another thing that's really great is when they have lab testing results on it, so that you can actually see that there is tracking on this. We're going to show you a product in just a minute. Limitations on concentrating or synthesizing. So in all of the KCPA acts and all of the laws, there is usually a 2% limitation on 7-OH. So what that would mean is if you looked in a product, if it had more than 1 milligram of 7-OH in the content, then that would not fall into the KCPA, and that would be an illegal product in the state. So that is what is getting rid of the synthetic products on the shelf for these states.
Laura, I just want to let you know that we have about 5 minutes for questions. So
this is our last one we got. So just wanted to show you a picture of a properly labeled product. When you can see this a little closer when you've got it, but you can see it has the serving sizes, supplement facts. It has all of the warnings on it. It has tracking information. So this is the kind of thing that you would be looking for in a product. But again, we just want to say that we're really happy to be able to present it to you today. We encourage you to become involved on your local level, especially considering you're in Connecticut, to really try to keep this option available. As you know, we're in the opioid epidemic right now, and pain patients are basically unable to even get pain medicine. And there are so many, people that are dealing with addiction that need a harm reduction solution. So we're really hoping that this could be, the wave of the future. And again, we encourage you to go to some of these sites, to especially AmericanKratom.org. You'll see a lot of science, protectkratom.org. And Kratom Stories podcast has a lot of stories that you can listen to about real patients and their recoveries. But here's our little post evaluation. We'll just keep that up. And if anybody has any questions, we would love to hear any questions or comments.
Yeah. Please take a picture of that post evaluation and fill that form out. You don't have to do it while we're doing Q&A, but it's important you do your post evaluation. Thank you.
And we are putting our contact emails in the chat so that you can write that down in case you would like to contact us with any questions. When I send out this PowerPoint that we've sent, it will be sent out in a PDF format. I will also be including links to the 2 videos, because you can actually, it's not a live link on those, but the other links, the PDF links are inside, will be live. But I know you might want to go back and relook at those videos or share them again. So that will be shared with you as well. So any questions or comments? And there's references as well, if you'd like to go back. Thank you again so much for letting us share our stories with you today and share a little bit about this plant that has meant so much to us. And I know on behalf of myself, John, Heidi, and Misty, we're just really grateful that you've taken the time to really learn about this. And hopefully you can pass this knowledge on. Feel free to pass on that PDF to your friends and family. Anyone that has questions, we don't have any patent on it. We just want to get the email out there and the information out there so that we can bust out. And I'd love to hear in an email if you start seeing those media reports, and now you're starting to critically look at them and realize what they're really saying. So thank you again.